And now for a special edition of the Weird News at 9 at 8:30. Early in the morning on October 30th, a man described by the New York Daily News as a career criminal was apprehended in the middle of a burglary at a upscale Fire Island, New York home. The residents had arisen to check out noises in the house, but found no one. However, in the vicinity of a closed door, they had heard flatulence and discovered Richard Magapon hiding in a closet. What kind of a career criminal was this guy? Everyone knows the first rule of being a burglar is never eat at a Taco Bell before committing a burglary. Everybody knows that. Come on. And in August, in Council Bluffs, Iowa, 7 relatives ranging in age from 10 to 71 piled into the family car intending to commit suicide over money troubles. The driver smashed into a second car, injuring the 3 occupants of the other car, but leaving the 7 depressed people uninjured. I mean, no wonder they're depressed. They have the worst luck. I think I know why. And as you may or may not know, we get most of our stories for the Weird News at 9 from an article called News of the Weird. And we have the gentleman who authors this publication. His name is Chuck Sheppard. Hello, Mr. Sheppard. How you doing?
Hi, good evening, Mark.
Good. I'd like to talk to you about your article, News of the Weird. How long has it been since you've been doing this?
Well, I did it as a hobby for, I guess I started about 1980, and I've been doing it commercially since 1988. It started out in a lot of the weekly alternative papers, but now it's pretty mainstream as tabloid journalism has taken hold, and it turns out now that really daily newspapers like to run this stuff, too. So it's been very successful in the last few years.
Yeah. Are there any stories that you wouldn't print? I mean, is there a line that you draw and say, this is like too much tabloid, or do you have any lines that you want to draw?
Well, I don't want to run things that are simply tragic, even though they might be a little ironic. I have a hard time with stories of death. The irony has to be pretty severe for me to do something in there, and it's sort of animal abuse. I don't really like to do all those. Some people laugh at that.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of things that I run personally. When it leaves my typewriter, they're in there, but the editors that carry News of the Weird around the country decide that they don't want to put it in for their readers, but that's not my sensibility. I have very few things that I would censor.
Where do you get most of your stories?
From daily newspapers. I read a lot myself. I read magazines and newspapers, and I surf through electronic databases, but since the newspaper column has been successful, I guess I pick up about 2/3 of the content of the column from readers. Some of them have been with me for a long time. They clip their newspapers in their local communities and send them to me, and I'm grateful for it because I don't have any T-shirts or coffee mugs that I can send them. I think they do it just because they enjoy the stories, or they're disturbed.
And they probably want to see the story they sent in the paper. They say, "Oh, hey, I sent them that,"
Well, that might be right.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure about that. I just know I'm very grateful for their help because what I get from them is a lot of the local stories that don't really run on the national wire services, and therefore I wouldn't see them even looking at the bigger papers.
About how many publications syndicate this?
Well, it's in about 50 of the weekly alternative papers and in maybe 175, 200 daily newspapers in the United States and Canada. And they run it in various forms. Some of them run the whole column, and some of them run the expurgated column, and some of them run it under... Some of them actually just take the column and they have their local columnist. They just steal the stories and put it under their local columnist name. But,
oh, nice.
Yeah, that's clever. But they pay, so you can't really hassle them.
We get it out of the Hartford Advocate in this area, and they run everything, and it says your name, Chuck Sheppard.
Oh, great. Well, thanks for the report.
Now, how long have you been doing this again? I'm sorry?
Commercially for about 6 years, as a hobby for a long time. I mean, some of the clippers that send me these things have been with me since we were hobbyists together, but I've been doing it for a long time, but just commercially for 6 years.
Do you have any stories that are really memorable for you, like from way back?
Sure. There's a lot of stories, but it's hard for me to focus on them individually. It's just whatever pops into my mind or whatever the category is. There's no all-time number one surefire story. There are some that stick in my mind more than others. I guess the story that I used to illustrate inexplicable weird behavior was from about 1980, 81 or so, from Long Beach, California, about a guy who checked into a rooming house for a week. And when he left, the landlord, who lived in the rooming house also, went in to see what condition his apartment was in, and found that the entire little one room was filled from floor to ceiling with boulders and pieces of cement, concrete, piled from, as I say, from floor to ceiling, with only a very small passageway from the door to the bed to the bathroom. And it turns out that this guy had also left his last rooming house in Long Beach in the same condition, and it was very hard for her to imagine, the landlord to imagine how this guy could have brought all of this stuff in the short space of a week. He must have been very busy.
Yeah, there's definitely some weird people out there, huh?
Yeah.
And you can definitely testify to that.
Yeah.
Another common theme that you usually print is civil rights, like weird stories like prisoners filing claims saying that their toilet seats are too cold, or
Sure.
they don't get enough Kool-Aid refills. They call that cruel and unusual punishment. Abuses of civil rights and all that.
Well, people, yeah, the lawsuits, the people who sue for, this is no longer a News of the Weird column, but there's sort of mainstream, most of the news magazine programs have done stories about the ridiculous things that people sue for. There's a lot of stories that come to mind. There's a woman who went into an IHOP in California, really hungry one morning. She wanted to take advantage of the some special they had for a regular breakfast for $2.99 or something, and it turns out that this IHOP was not participating in the national special, so she sued them for $2 billion.
Oh my gosh.
And there was another case of a guy who had purchased a videotape of produced by Tom Seaver, the pitcher. It had Tom Seaver and a bunch of other people and giving tips on how to play baseball. And, of course, for Tom Seaver, it was the pickoff move, and they had it on tape. And what you're supposed to do, of course, is you look at the tape and you see the techniques that Tom Seaver used. Well, this guy set it up in his basement, and he was leading off of first base, which was a glass table with a lamp built into it, and he was leading off while he was watching Tom Seaver's pickoff move, trying to detect the moves that he was making so he could try to steal second. Of course, Seaver made the throw back to first base, and the guy lost control of himself and dived back into the table and suffered various injuries. And, of course, the thing to do in that case is to sue Tom Seaver, because there was no warning on the videotape not to play this inside.
Oh, jeez. Some people are just too much.
Yeah.
Do you have any stories on the since New York City has passed a law that women can go topless in subways? Have you got any stories about that?
I haven't. We're looking for stories there, because that really actually is the law now, as I understand it. Is that there are a lot of stories of people protesting without clothes. It seems to be a sort of a worldwide movement. I've heard a lot more of them from the Far East than I have so far from New York, but they've from India and Malaysia and Taiwan. Within the last 3 or 4 months, they've had nude marches in protest of things that don't make any sense. There's, of course, the nude disarmament. There's nude protest against fur wearing. There's nude protest because of the street construction in a town in India that's bothering everybody, keeping them awake and preventing them from getting to their religious services and so forth. So they thought the thing to do was to sort of take off their clothes, and that was somehow going to help things out.
That's an interesting form of protest.
I don't understand it.
Yeah. How about Ronnie Nicolino? Dubbed him the Bra Man. He wants to, I guess, span 10,000 bras across the Grand Canyon. Has he done that yet, do you know?
He's not done it yet. He's plans it for 95, and he's collecting them. You imagine, he does these little whistle stops. He gets on a train and goes throughout the Southeast, and he hopes that people will show up in the town. He's not a publicity agent. And he has a barrel, and his little whistle stops, and people show up, and they're supposed to throw their bras into this barrel, and he collects them all, and he needs 10,000 bras to string them across the Grand Canyon. Of course, the National Park Service has not yet ruled on whether he'll be allowed to do this, but he's proceeding anyway. And the latest thing he did, or it would be the latest thing I reported anyway, earlier in 1994, he had to publicize this, to call attention to it. He and many volunteers in Stinson Beach, California, built a sand structure consisting of, I forgot what it was, maybe about 20,000, I was thinking, size 34C breasts in the sand, again, just to call attention and hoping that he can round up more contributions of brassieres. I guess that's good work if you can get it.
Yeah, I bet he gets to meet a lot of people.
Right.
Now, do you have any books out, or you just do this syndication?
No, thanks for asking. There are 4 collections of these things. News of the Weird, the not creatively titled More News of the Weird, and the even less creatively titled Beyond News of the Weird. They're still out in paperback, and there's a 4th book called America's Least Competent Criminals. And those should be available, although they're at a diminishing number of bookstores around the country.
Oh, sold them all out already, huh?
Well, that's the interesting thing about the book publishing these days. You can sell out in a burst, and the books sell very well at first. But somehow, if you don't have a hook on it, then the chains that control the publication these days, the chains won't reorder it, and you're sort of stuck in a twilight zone of pretty good sales, but you can never really break out of that. I've learned a lot about the book publishing business, more than I wanted to know.
Oh, I see. Now, if anybody has a story, can you give them an address to send the stories to?
Oh, I'll be glad to. Thanks again. It's Chuck Sheppard at Post Office Box 8306 in St. Petersburg, Florida, 33738. Post Office Box 8306, St. Petersburg, Florida 33738. I'd love to see your stories, and I do try to answer my mail. I'm not 100% with it, so I don't give any guarantees. But it's not something impersonal where I got a bank of secretaries answering my. I'm here by myself.
Sure, you'll probably get some stories pretty soon about this woman at McDonald's who suing for millions of dollars because she spilt her coffee in her lap.
Spiller Coffee, right? That was a big story, and it was not the first one. There had been several other stories, but the difference between this woman actually won $2.9 million from a jury, although it was later reduced. But I know of maybe a half a dozen stories that came in from time to time with the lawsuits being filed over the last maybe 3 or 4 years, and the only problem was they dropped the lawsuits or they settled them for ridiculously small amounts of money, a couple of $100s. This woman, the only difference, she plowed ahead and got a lot of money.
Wow, unbelievable.
Yeah.
All right, this is Chuck Sheppard, and he's the author of News of the Weird, nationally syndicated. How should I say it? Not article, but
it's a column, nationally syndicated column.
Thank you. I'm having brain cramp tonight, I guess.
Well, you're an electronic media guy, so.
Yeah, comes in. All right, thanks a lot. And can you stay on the line for a minute?
Okay, sure, Mark.
All right, thanks a lot. Chuck Sheppard, News of the Weird. And we'll talk more about that later. And if you didn't get a chance to get that address, give me a call here at 456-2164 throughout the show, and I'll get it to you. And we'll be right back with some more good music right here on WECS, Something Different.
This is Chuck Sheppard, author of News of the Weird, and you're listening to the Mark E. Ramone Show on WECS.